Ron raised his granddaughter, Sasha, and was devastated when she died in a car accident. However, when he opened the coffin during the funeral, he was shocked by what he found. Ron was an automotive technician who was on the verge of retirement when tragedy struck his family. He had a son whom he was very proud of. The boy mostly followed in his footsteps and showed a great interest in mechanical work. He went to school to learn a trade and did well there. He met a wonderful woman and they had a beautiful girl. The young family brought great happiness to Ron. Even though his wife had passed away, he was content with his life. Ron loved his work and enjoyed repairing vintage cars. He often looked after the little girl after school, and she developed an interest in Ron's car repair hobby. It was wonderful for him to have the opportunity to pass on his passion to another generation. The family was very close and happy until a fateful day when a car accident changed everything. On that day, Ron picked up Sasha from school and brought her home with him. They were in the garage together. He was working on his latest project and she was telling him every detail of her afternoon. The afternoon dragged on and Ron grew increasingly worried when his son didn't come pick up Sasha for dinner. Trying not to unsettle the sweet 7-year-old girl, they went to the kitchen and made hot dogs. A few minutes after they settled in the kitchen, Ron received the call he had feared. His son and daughter-in-law had died in a car accident just 2 hours ago. Ron's and Sasha's life were irreversibly changed that day. They were devastated. But there was one thing that kept them going, the simple fact that they had each other. Ron was overjoyed to learn that he had been appointed as Sasha's guardian. His son had made sure it was documented and had written a will as soon as he became a father. As lawyers investigated the case, it became clear that the parents wanted Sasha to be in Ron's custody within a few days. This led to several changes in Ron's and Sasha's lives. Sasha moved in with her grandfather and had to switch schools as a result. Ron's retirement plans were put on hold indefinitely and he reorganized his finances to care for a child full time. It was an incredibly challenging time for them, but fortunately they had each other. Having previously lost his wife, Ron was familiar with this kind of grief. Sasha, on the other hand, had never experienced losing someone before. She needed a lot of support and reassurance from Ron, and even the school community rallied together to help the sweet child. All of this contributed to Ron's and Sasha's healing journey and even led them to a new tradition. Just around the time Sasha's parents were involved in a car accident, the two would go for walks and engage with neighbors. It was too difficult for them to sit in the hours between school and dinner because it felt like reliving that day. So Ron adapted and witnessed Sasha making many friends, deciding it was best to immerse themselves in this camaraderie. They took long walks together, enjoyed the afternoons, and after a week it became their ritual. During one of these walks on a dark and rainy day, Sasha discovered something that caught Ron's attention. Not many people were outside due to the weather that day. Sasha perked up her ears because she heard a faint whimpering sound. She paused and tried to be quiet, listening again. A few steps ahead, Ron turned around to see what she was up to. Ron walked over to the sidewalk towards the bushes. He wanted to find out what had caught Sasha's attention and was shocked to find a small dog huddled in the foliage. The dog was grey and white, with matted fur and very thin legs. Sasha and Ron approached the dog cautiously and got close enough to see that the poor thing was undernourished and trembling. Ron took off his jacket and wrapped the dog in it. Together they took the puppy to the veterinarian to find out if it was lost or belonged to someone. The dog had no tags or microchip and appeared as though it had never been groomed. The vet suspected it had gotten lost or had been abandoned long ago. Sasha was practically in love with the dog and refused to leave the clinic without him. They named the little dog Pepper and he immediately responded to that name. The small family expanded with a new 4-legged member. For several years they lived relatively happy, healthy and safe together. But tragedy struck their family once again shortly after Sasha turned 10. Ron gave her permission to take Pepper for a walk. She was a good, responsible child and he felt it was the right time to give her a little more space and time for herself. The day after Sasha's 10th birthday, she set off to have a nice afternoon stroll with Pepper. However, strangely enough, the two didn't return in time for dinner. For the second time in his life, Ron anxiously waited at home, panic and fear building up in his stomach. Had she taken a different route? Had she gotten lost? Had she lost track of time? Maybe she was out with friends. Ron tried not to think of the worst case scenario, but it became increasingly difficult as the minutes ticked by. He set the food on the table and waited for Sasha. Then Ron received a phone call that confirmed his worst fears. The poor girl had been grazed by a passing vehicle as she bent down to pet Pepper. The dog was unharmed, but she had fallen and hit her head on the pavement. In an instant, she was gone. Ron felt like his world was crumbling around him, and he was practically inconsolable. Upon hearing the news, some neighbors who knew his story rushed to his aid. They retrieved Pepper from the authorities and brought it back to him. Thus, the last remaining members to the family were reunited. Pepper was a source of comfort for the family, but also a strong reminder of Sasha. A neighbor took care of feeding and walking the dog for a few days, following the news that Ron had received. Soon, it was time for the funeral to lay Sasha to rest. Ron was still lost in the fog of his grief and had little involvement in the preparations. He insisted that Pepper be by his side, of course. Everyone supported that and sat kindly behind him during the service. When the service came to an end, the pastor closed the lid on the casket and the two stood up to bid farewell to Sasha before the wood was sealed. It was at this point that Ron noticed something that left him completely speechless. Pepper stood on his hind legs as they approached the casket and began barking angrily. Ron thought Pepper wanted to see Sasha's lifeless body once again, so he opened the casket and let Pepper sniff, and there he saw it. The faint but unmistakable rise and fall of a breathing chest. Ron cried out for help and desperately tried to wake Sasha up. The mourners were horrified, initially thinking that his grief had turned into madness, but then they joined him in his astonishment as they saw Sasha slowly sit up. It turned out she had been in a brief coma since the car accident, but otherwise was alive and well. Ron and Pepper took her home, and the three continued their lives, knowing they would be there for each other a little while longer. What an incredible ending.